My boyfriend of almost 2 years faked having cancer so he could move to Nye with another person. It sounds fake, I know. But this is what happened to me just recently. I'm writing this for therapeutic reasons, but also to maybe find the girl he left me for. There's a high chance he met her on Reddit. I keep dreaming about telling her who he truly is, so she doesn't waste her life or love on him. So if you are the girl, message me. I'll give some context to our relationship and then jump into the title's situation. So buckle up. This will be a long one. So I, 21, non-binary, met this man, 23 male, on the internet in April 2022. And I felt like we immediately hit it off. I was pretty lonely at the time, and he made everything better. He kept me company and was lovely to be around. He was smart and kind, sensitive, and just amazing. He made me feel good about myself. When he told me the type of person he liked, I seemed to check all the boxes, both mentally and physically. Looking back on it, things moved extremely fast. But I didn't realize it at the time. I thought we were just soulmates finally finding each other, and that's why everything was so smooth and easy. I suppose he was really just love-bombing me. And I fell for it. He told me he loved me 15 days after we first started talking. And even though I was so happy, there was this weird feeling in my stomach. It didn't feel entirely right. But I ignored it, of course. I convinced myself that I was just getting used to having someone be so passionate about me. Soon after, he started throwing temper tantrums when I had to do things that meant I couldn't text him for a while and claimed to have separation anxiety. So I started texting him throughout the whole day. If I ever took more than 15 minutes to reply, I knew I'd come back to him being whiny and sad, and I'd have to cheer him up. So I worked extra hard to make sure I always replied within 5 minutes or less, no matter what I was doing. At the end of May that same year, I started having lots of family problems. And when I opened up to him about them, he made me feel like I was bothering him. I was extremely depressed at the time, and I felt like I couldn't even rely on him to talk about anything. This went on for a couple months until everything settled. I'd just pretend to be happy all the time, to not be depressed, to not be worried about my family problems. And when there were days I couldn't pretend, he'd withdraw and barely reply to my texts. By this point in time, I had developed separation anxiety. I felt emotionally dependent on him. And I guess that's what he wanted me to be. At one point he said he just loved how I treated him and accommodated him, and that he felt like he was my whole world. And he was. My whole life revolved around him. There was nobody above him. He was my everything, just like he wanted. Around August that same year, I started attending school in person again. That meant I had to drive. You can't text while driving, can you? You can guess what a nightmare my life became. My commute was an hour long both ways, with no stops at all to text him. So he was always moody. And my university program is very practical, so I had classes where I couldn't text him at all because, of course, I had to text him through all of my theory classes. And that just made him even moodier and hard to deal with. But I pushed through it and just kept being happy and lovely and always apologizing for everything I did. But it wasn't enough. He just made me feel terrible, like the worst partner in the universe. Around October 2022, I had to temporarily drop out of school for whatever reasons. So he was happy again. I was extremely depressed. I wasn't happy that I couldn't go to school anymore. But he was. And when I started talking to him about me being at least hopeful that I could start studying again in 2023 and wanting to read books about my field meanwhile, he was very hostile. At one point I showed him one of the books I wanted to read and he said, "What are you going to read that for?" "If you're so hell-bent on going back to school, there's no point." And I never read the book. But after a while, everything started to settle. With me being able to devote all my time to him, he was happy. Everything was okay. Whenever I had an opinion he didn't like, I'd just change it to avoid making him upset. Whenever I did something he didn't want me to do, I'd stop doing it. And I was happy living like that because I didn't know better. He'd reduced me to a shell of myself, but I thought he'd changed me for the better. Even though I felt bad that I had to second guess every word I said, every opinion I had, I was happy. I felt so in love. I felt needed, too. He was good at making me feel like he needed me. He was, or claimed to be, I have no idea anymore, chronically ill. He was chronically depressed. He had horrible panic attacks. And he said that I helped him feel better. He really wasn't the kind of abuser, because he was an abuser. I've come to accept the fact. That would scream and call me horrible names. He was the kind that would act sad and whine about things, that would mop about for a while until I got him to be happy again. And after a while, I got good at making him happy. And I won't lie, it made me so happy to know he needed me. Because I needed him too. And from November 2022 to June 2023, he was nice to me most of the time. He was attentive. He said he loved me every single day. He would call me and we'd watch movies and shows together. He'd play games and stream them to me, and we'd solve them together or I'd just watch him play. We'd sleep on calls a lot. The normal things you'd do in LDR. We talked all day, every day. He was my whole life. But every now and then we would get into arguments. He would say he was paranoid about me finding someone else or just not loving him anymore. How he would also say that I didn't love him the way he loved me. So I tried to change. I changed the way I loved him so he felt like he was getting the same kind of love back. But it wasn't enough. Around April 2023, I felt like everything was perfect. Until one day he started a massive argument because of an opinion I had. It lasted 6 hours. We solved nothing. I still had the opinion I had before the argument, even though he told me that if I really loved him like I said I did, I'd find a way to fix it. But I just couldn't change it. I won't get into what it was, but it's a very personal opinion that I won't change for anybody. We got through it by just ignoring it. By pretending the argument had never happened. But maybe that's what made him do what he did. Not that it excuses it, but it could explain it. I don't know. The next few months were okay. We kept doing the stuff we always did, both good and bad. But around mid-July, I went on a trip to another state to see my aunt and to rest for a while before I started school again. He was obviously moody that I was going on the trip. My aunt had initially wanted to take me to these beautiful cabins up in the woods, but I refused because I wouldn't have had internet access there. Looking back, that would benefited him. Around the 5th day of my trip, 22nd of July, he texted me saying one of his 2 friends was in town, and that he was gonna go see him. Now we had been using Life 360, of course, because of his paranoia that I was cheating on him. I was really weirded out by this, but I said nothing. I followed him on the damn app and saw he went to a hotel. I asked why his friend was at a hotel, and he said he was there for a gaming tournament that would take place at the hotel. I believed him, but I was very weirded out. He kept texting me throughout the day saying stuff like, "Oh, my friend just told me this. My friend just did this. It was so funny." He then said he wasn't able to go back home the same day, and he had to stay until the next day. Around 8 at night that day, he must have turned off his phone because the Life 360 app couldn't tell me where he was, and he just stopped answering my texts. I was extremely weirded out by everything, so I started calling him. I must have called him 20 times. He never answered. The next morning, I woke up to him asking me if I'd called him because of an emergency. I said nothing about the calls and just said good morning to him, and went on with my day. I went to a beautiful lake that day, and I didn't have internet there. But I just enjoyed my day away from him. I was so happy, but then I felt guilty for feeling happy that I didn't have to be constantly texting him. That same night, 23rd of July, after I'd gotten service again, he told me he was moving to New York. I was even more weirded out about that. I asked why. He said one of his friends had gotten him a job there teaching music. He then tried to gaslight me into believing he'd told me he was looking for jobs in New York. But he had never mentioned anything like that before that day. But I didn't want to make a fuss because I was scared that he'd say I was being overbearing or that I didn't want him to succeed in life. So I just said that I was happy for him. The next day, 24th of July, he told me he was going to New York that day. I asked what the rush was, and he said that the odds of finding a place he could afford would go drastically down because of the location if he waited another day. I straight up asked if he was going to break up with me after that, because everything just felt so weird. And that's when he said, "No, I just don't have the energy I used to. One of the reasons I'm moving is that I need to be in a place where I have access to a better hospital. My body is failing. I have lymphoma." My whole life crumbled down at that point. I couldn't believe that this beautiful person, who I was sure was the love of my life, had cancer. I spent a couple days just crying and crying, worrying, not eating. It wasn't a good time. The next few months were mostly a blur. I went back to school and I just tried to do my best, and I did. I was doing awesome in school. Perfect grades in all classes. Meanwhile, he was barely ever replying to me. He turned off the Life 360 app as soon as he got to New York. He didn't tell me he loved me anymore. He never wanted to call. But I assumed it was because he was so tired and sick since he had cancer. So I never made a fuss. I just took things as they were, cried on my own, kept being perfect and loving and supportive. He only called me 4 times after he moved, and 3 of those times he was out in the streets and always hung up before he got into his apartment. The one time he called me while in the apartment, we only talked for 20 minutes before he hung up abruptly. He never told me where he lived. But I saw pictures of the apartment. It was extremely nice for his economy. Beautiful wooden floors, a nice view of a restaurant. He also had lots of beautiful bedsheets, plates, bowls. Even a gray cat that he said he'd rescued. Now, I'm not stupid, despite what he always tried to make me think. I knew he was up to weird shit. But for my own mental sanity, I ignored everything. I couldn't afford to get caught up in all of it. I was in the middle of a really mentally taxing semester at school. I just couldn't think about the bullshit he was up to. And so I chose to believe everything he said. He didn't even know what stage the cancer was in, but I thought maybe he just didn't want to talk about it. He used to tell me he was on chemotherapy, but none of his hair fell out. So I just assumed it was a very low dose. He told me the nurses at the hospital had trimmed his beard and cleaned out his nasty nails. But they don't really do that, do they? I just fooled and gaslighted myself for 4 months, believing that he had cancer. Believing that he was working at a school in Queens teaching jazz to teens. Believing his friend Roger was taking care of him and making sure he ate. I believed all the lies he told me and the lies I told myself. But most of the time, I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And on the 24th of November, it finally did. I was at school when I got a text from him that said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I'm not coming back after today." A ridiculous explanation about him not feeling well enough for a relationship anymore, about having recently found someone else that was taking care of him, and confessing that he lied about having cancer. And the end, the final blow. I would like if you respect this and don't try to contact me. I really need it. That's what I was worth to him. After all the pain and the sadness he put me through, after all the love I gave him, I was worth a shitty text message that had 252 words in it. He obviously blocked me everywhere immediately after sending it. Because he's a coward. I went insane for a couple days. I cried everywhere all the time. I smoked 4 packs of cigarettes in 2 days. I kept trying to make a whole out of the tiny bits of information he'd given me in that shitty text he sent before he left. But I couldn't. And I needed to know who he'd left me for. It's an insane thought, but I just needed to know. And I kept trying to find clues anywhere I could. I needed answers. And one day while going through my messages with him, I somehow found a way to find a social profile of his friend Roger. And I eventually found it. I pondered whether to massage Roger for a couple days. And then I decided that I had to take the chance and ask him if any of what my ex had said had been true. If he was really taking care of my ex, and if he'd really gotten him that job in New York, if maybe he was the one my ex left me for. I had nothing to lose. Roger answered. And together we started arranging the puzzle pieces. He told me he knew that my ex had moved in with a girl at the end of July, but that he had never mentioned her before that time. And that he never mentioned breaking up with me either. And we realized that, just like I suspected, he'd gone to meet the girl at that hotel on the 22nd of July. We realized that my ex is a pathological liar that lies about the weirdest things. And together we sort of answered 90s of the questions I had. And I found out that my ex was, of course, driving the girl insane, just like he'd done to me. My ex had told Roger that his new girlfriend was insane and that she was convinced that he was cheating on her, but that he wasn't. This is probably the main reason I want to find the girl. I don't want her to go insane. I want to tell her that she's 100, right? It was very freeing, to say the least. I realized he wasn't the love of my life. He wasn't the perfect person I'd made him up to be. He wasn't who I thought he was, not even close. And even if my image of him got destroyed, at least now I know I didn't lose that much. He lost more than I did. I loved him unconditionally. I loved him harder than I thought I could ever love anybody. The relationship was terrible looking back. But what I felt for him was pure. He was my first real boyfriend. And I loved him more than the world. I don't hate my ex. I probably should, but I'd rather look at him with compassion for my own sake. I think he's just a lost, fucked up kid. I don't know why he did the things he did. I don't know why he didn't just tell me he'd found someone else at the time he did. I don't know why the fuck he lied about having cancer. I'll never know. At this point in time, I'd rather just not know. But for the love I once felt for him, I hope he's able to get better in every way one day. I hope he's happy one day. Thank you if you read this shit show. And really, if you are the girl, please message me. Or at least know that you were right about him cheating on you. He cheated on both of us. He isn't worth it. You're worth much more than that. I don't know you, but I know you are. You don't need him. Don't let him break you down like he did to me.